can you tell us a little bit about how you got started on your instrument?
All right, I'll start out. Good morning, everyone. So I actually have a little bit of a unique story with music. I was quite neurodivergent as a kid and had some trouble getting into um, getting into music. I took Suzuki for a while, piano, and got kicked out because I talked a little bit too much and had a little too much fun in class. Um, but I eventually found my way back to music. I always really loved it in high school, in the orchestra there. And this was kind of where I made my first connections. I made some really incredible friends, and I started um, feeling how my work on my own instrument and how my work privately could connect me with people, like through chamber music. And I think that's kind of driven everything I do about music. I love the viola. I chose it because I didn't want to carry a cello home on the bus. But yeah, that's a little bit of my story with music. So
That's awesome. So you did start on the viola?
I did start on the viola. I am a
Wow.
violist. People find their way there somehow, but I did start on the viola. So
That's awesome.
mhm.
Okay, Christopher, do you want to dive in?
Sure. So I started violin when I was 5 years old. So I had kind of maybe the more quote unquote traditional kind of beginning. I grew up in Toronto, in Canada, and was very fortunate to have access to some pretty amazing music education. The Royal Conservatory of Music is a really fantastic organization that supports young musicians of all ages. And so I did have a pretty kind of standard violin training at the beginning. I did my Suzuki, I did my Twinkle Twinkle variations. I think what really shifted my perspective on music and really inspired me to kind of pursue music was somewhat similar to Lauren. Was in high school. I went to a public performing arts high school in Toronto um, that had a really kind of a progressive take on what arts education could look like. So it wasn't particularly competitive. You didn't really have to audition. All you had to have was interest in some art form, and everybody took two kind of art streams as they went. And what was so amazing about the school was while it did have a strings program, it also had a 70-piece soul and R&B band that toured across the U.S. We went to Cuba. We played at Graceland. And I also had a teacher who introduced me to a lot of like really avant-garde improvisation, John Cage, a lot of these composers that most people don't run into until they're a little bit older. So that I guess you could say that like totally blew my mind, and it really opened up what music could be. And so then I decided I had to go into music. I started in university as a music history major, because I thought that musicology meant like writing for Rolling Stone magazine, which I was quickly that illusion was quickly popped, and, and I got really into practicing violin, and kind of took a reverse course. I got super into Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven, and now since then I've been kind of trying to reintegrate all these different areas in my musical life, and the quartet has become a really amazing kind of place to experiment with those things for me and for my colleagues.
Can you guys, one of you, talk about how the quartet came together?
Sure, I can take that one. So one of the luxuries of studying classical music after a certain point is you get to go to beautiful places to play music. So Kumiko and I, the other violinist, who happens to be my wife, we wanted to go to Italy for summer, and there was a summer program that was run by some of our faculty at the San Francisco Conservatory. And we approached one of them and said, hey, we'd love to come to this festival, and we'd love to put a quartet together so we could spend a couple weeks playing great music and just really focus on quartet. And she took this to mean that we wanted to start a full-time professional quartet. And we did not want to do that, but we kind of let her run with that because she got really excited, and she found some other people to pair us with. And so we spent 2 weeks at the foot of Mont Blanc playing chamber music and learning quartets with the four founding members of the group. And And really, the success of a quartet is dependent on the relationships between the four people. I mean, you can make great music, but what really matters is that the four of you basically get along, because you spend a lot of hours together, you travel together, you get to know each other very well. So this spark was really there at the beginning, and we were fortunate that the following year, the conservatory in San Francisco was starting a fellowship for young quartets. So it was a 2-year, fully funded graduate fellowship. And the school really took a chance on us. We were very brand new. We were up against much more established groups, but they must have seen something in us, and that was what really got the quartet going. And since then, we left the Bay Area. We moved to Austin, Texas, where we studied at the University of Texas, and then in 2020 arrived in College Park, Maryland. One of the amazing things about quartets is that they are an ever-changing entity. So the lineup that is performing Music for Great Spaces is not the original four, but every time a new member joins the group, there is kind of a new injection of energy, a new spirit, and it's been so amazing and inspiring to watch the group shift over the years while still being able to maintain a strong commitment to kind of our vision and mission as a group. That has never changed, but our approaches have changed. The people who kind of join the team have changed, but it's always stayed true to that.
Awesome.
Can I ask, Christopher, you mentioned that now you're trying to pull all of your musical background together. What does that look like or sound like?
That's a great question. And I think we all probably would have different answers to this, because we all really prioritize having kind of multifaceted, full, balanced lives. So we bring inspirations from all areas of our life into the quartet. I think Lauren and I feel a bit similar about this, though, is that I've always felt a little uncomfortable in the classical music world. It's felt like a kind of a fit, like I can wear the jeans, but they're just not quite sitting in the right place. And I think a lot of that comes with, its history is kind of complicated. The academic side or the institutional side of classical music has its challenges. So for me in the quartet, it's really been questioning why we do so many of these things in the classical music world. The simple stuff like, why do I have to wear a suit? I like wearing a suit, but or why can't audiences clap between movements? Or why can't we just play concerts at people's houses? Or why don't we talk more? Why do people think there's this barrier between the performer and the audience? And that, to me, is kind of drawn in my experience of playing bar shows and rock bands. Like that's the spirit that I think we really like to bring to the group. Another area of my own life that I've found kind of an outlet for is I do a lot of improvising. And what's interesting is every string quartet performance is improvised. Even though we have a very strict set of rules, we have the music, we have the score, we kind of know how it's going to start and end. The most beautiful performances are when we have that spontaneity as a group. So Lauren might decide to take a specific timing, and I have to be right there with her, or it's going to sound bad. And so being able for myself to discover that, like, improvisation, all these things that I love so much, is kind of deeply baked into quartet playing, while questioning some of these kind of bigger structures, I think has been really enriching for me.
And I might jump in and add even more to that. I think both Chris and myself also, we kind of also share a little bit of our family history. Is we don't come from a family of musicians. We, my parents want to hear Sweet Child of Mine, like that's what they really get going at. When I play that with the string quartet, they are having the time of their life. And something about this, I think, has really informed my approach to how I play music and how I communicate music. Is I don't work under the assumption that everyone has been raised since they were 4 years old to know what a dynamic is. And, the details for me are slightly different, because I want to see someone smile. I want to see someone have a good time and be involved in my groove. And I think this is something that Thalea String Quartet does really well, because although we're all classically trained and we've all been through the, ruler on the back of the hand about when to play, what fingering to use, which bowing to use, at the end of the day, what makes our performances so fun for me is this improvisatory style and spirit that we all bring to the music. So I think some of that is from the history of just loving music for music. So
Can you tell us a favorite performance memory or a particularly memorable concert that speaks to you for some reason?
well, I'll jump in. I think I have two quick answers for this one. One, the performance that really made me know that music is what I wanted to do. I played in high school. I was doing the solo part of Vaughan Williams' theme from Thomas Tallis. Incredible, incredible, moving work. And I struggled with stage fright quite a lot and have for most of my life. But in this moment, it was the first time that I felt, as I was playing the solo, that everyone on stage is like there to be with you and to connect with you. And they're not like waiting for you to fail or, all of those things that you feel internally. And so that was a really powerful moment for me. And that sticks with me anytime I think about the connection that I feel with music and with musicians on stage. And then from that, I think maybe one of my favorite recent performances was we were at Caramore and we were on stage and it was so hot and it was so humid and we were all melting and we were in this outside performance venue. So we had to work so hard to make our sounds carry through the auditorium. But there was something so visceral and so alive about us all giving like 150% that day. And like, I don't know, I really remember that as a powerful moment because at the end, Alex looked like he had gone to a water park and Chris's like shirt was unbuttoned and like sideways, and Kamiko had like danced in her chair the entire, I don't know. It was just a really powerful thing to share, is the exhaustion you feel, but the exhaustion you feel giving something so good. Oh.
That's a great answer. Chris, do you have any that you want to also, or do you want to let that one, the Caramore experience, be?
I mean, I'm sweating just thinking about that one. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful story, and I think that really, I love both of those anecdotes, and I relate to the first one, and that fear and those inner narratives you tell yourself, and realizing in real time that those are all fake is really powerful. And then that Caramore experience was, I think, a real bonding experience for the four of us because we really went through the ringer, and it was really powerful and really fun, and the audience had a great time. So that's all that counts.
So the next thing is, can you tell us about one of the pieces that you've chosen on the program and kind of why you chose it? So whichever one of you wants to take that one.
All right, I can hop into that. I think we love all the music on this program, and we've really enjoyed playing all of this music all across the country, from major cities to tiny towns in the middle of the Midwest. So it's a very hard answer, but I think the most powerful piece is, for me, DBR's "Clap Your Hands." And aside from it being really fun, I think it's a really powerful statement that the composer made, because in the piece we asked the audience to clap along with us, and that sounds really like kind of boring if you think about going to a Taylor Swift concert. But in a classical music context, audience participation is pretty rare, and in a string quartet performance, I would say it's rarer still. And I think it speaks to what we need in our field. we talk a lot about, engaging audiences and bringing in new audiences. And I think really the first step is making sure everybody feels comfortable, that everybody feels like they can speak to the music they're hearing, that everybody can participate regardless of their experience with the music that we play. For me, the most insightful comments that I've gotten after performances have started with, I don't know anything about classical music, but, and I'll always remember this guy. We were playing in France, and he came up to us. He was so excited. We had just played Shostakovich, and I was trying to speak French to him. He was trying to speak English to me, and he basically just said, like, all I do all day is watch football. I just watch soccer. I don't know anything about music. I never listen to music. But what you just showed me was like watching a football match. Like, you were all so active. It was all so physical. And so those entry points, I think, are so essential. And the simple act of having people play along with us is huge. We're literally making music together. So for me, I think that Clap Your Hands is amazing. It's a really amazing experience every time.
So, could you talk a little about how you build your programs? What that means for those who are not as familiar with the notion of reading a program before they come to a concert, and if there's anything you could just kind of slip in there, even about like the thoughtfulness you have behind the composers that you choose and whatnot.
Chris is a large mastermind behind our programming. I think his passion for music and for creating through storylines has been something really integral to the quartet. And watching him create these programs has been really fun for me also to see what he comes up with. So this particular program that I'm most fond of lately is the Legacies program. And this is where we're sort of taking a backwards look into the sound of America. And so we're playing the Beatles, the B-side of the Abbey Road album. It's one of the coolest classical music pieces I've ever played. And it's also probably the hardest on our program. We are clapping and stomping and guitar soloing, and Alex has a pretty amazing drum solo on cello, and there's crickets, there's I don't know, it's full of extended technique and 32 tracks that are compressed down for 4 people. The Beatles probably layered and layered. And speaking of creating accessibility in the classical music concert halls, there's not many times I've walked to a classical music concert and heard Beatles. Like, it's not something that I think people immediately think it belongs in a classical concert hall. But when they hear this piece, I think they understand very quickly why it's on our programming. So we have DBR, we have Beatles, we have my family's from Louisiana, and Louisiana is like the home of jazz, the home of where soul meets American fiddle and expanded outwards into the entire world. So we look here at jazz, at rock, at where all of that came from. We have a little bit of West Coast hip hop, which is in this DBR piece. And then it all goes backwards to the Dvorak, which, Dvorak was a lover of the folk music of his home country. And he brought that incredible passion over to America. And, he was hired to come over and find the American sound. And he came over, and quite against popular belief, he said, y'all are ridiculous. Have you not heard the spiritual? And he basically shook the entire classical music world and said, what are y'all doing? You have so much rich musical heritage here. Listen. And I think, there are many problems with the American String Quartet for some aspects of it. But one thing that I think is really important that he did is he first said, this is classical music. It belongs here. It belongs to you all. Take it back. And so ending our program with that, I feel, has been really powerful. And the solos in Dvorak become a little bit more full of life and a little bit more rural and a little bit more fiddly. And I think hearing it go backwards, the audience gets that in a different way. Sorry, that was a little long, but if you could tie that up, Chris, for me, that'd be great.
Well, thank you, Lauren. I mean, I think this program is a nice example of what we try to do with all of our programming. I think there's the storyline. I think recontextualizing, I think, is something that's become really important to us. So like Lauren said, when you put DBR next to Dvorak, suddenly you hear the groove in Dvorak so clearly. And it's been really interesting to see that classic piece through a different light. We've always liked to, celebrate the history of the quartet repertoire because there's so much incredible music that stretches back, 250 years. We also feel like it's important to represent voices that haven't been heard on our concert stages. And I think it's been a really interesting couple of years seeing how ensembles and organizations have kind of approached this topic, because it's a big one and it's a difficult one. And I think it's important that we find a way to approach this that feels really genuine. And I think something that I am particularly interested by is this idea of bringing in different types of music to our repertoire. Something I've always been resistant to, and that we've kind of touched on, is this idea that classical music is better than all other music. It's total baloney. I could use a harsher word, but I won't. And I think that is one tool that has like really crushed other music, and I think that's awful. I think chamber music is, you can find chamber music in a barbershop quartet, those Motown backup singers. That's amazing chamber music, right? A jazz ensemble they're listening at a much higher level than we are and creating much faster, and their brains have to move like a mile a minute. So for me, that's something that I think is really interesting in our programming that we're trying to explore more. And that also touches on who we commission to write new works. We have worked with composers that have come up through the conservatory system, but we're much more intrigued by composers who haven't. Maybe composers who don't use traditional Western notation. There's a different process when you're working with an artist who speaks a completely different musical language. And I think that's the kind of thing that excites us. So that when we look ahead to our programs, I think those are things that we're still going to hold very closely.
So we like to ask our artists about something that inspires them, whether it be a person or a moment in life.
What inspires me, kind of always, is the desire to learn, and the desire to learn from the stimuli, the interactions around you. I think I find quartet incredibly inspiring, or chamber music inspiring, because you're forced, in a good way, to get really up in other people's brains. You really have to think from a different perspective. You really have to think from a different mindset. And something about that I find really powerful, because my mind's a great place, but leaving it, I feel like that's where all of the growth comes from. So there's a lot of growth in finding that. I'm really inspired by the incredible colleagues I work with, and it sounds cheesy, but like their souls, like who they are as a person, even more so than who they are as a musician. And I think they bring that and their care and dedication for their work every day. And I don't know, I'm just feeling extra grateful for that this last month for sure. So.
Christopher, do you want to talk about inspiration?
Sure. I agree with so much of what Lauren has said. I really relate to a lot of that. What has also been on my mind over the last few days is mentorship and the importance of mentors. I think that was mentioned in the question. just a few days ago, the Chamber Music World lost one of its most inspiring musicians, Jeff Nuttall, the first violinist of the St. Lawrence Quartet. And the quartet was very, very fortunate to have worked with him quite a bit. We performed alongside him a couple of times. We were actually scheduled to play with him last spring, but the pandemic had to cancel the concert. Jeff was truly life-changing for so many people, and I'm very fortunate to have many musical heroes and many amazing mentors, but he was really life-changing for me, and it's like really impossible to think about that he's not around. And what he kind of championed was just deeply connecting with the emotional content of everything you play. And he was such a stirring and inspiring performer, and I can never hope to match that at all, but I think it's just remembering what he championed and what he believed in will keep his spirit alive in a lot of ways. And he has a lot of there are a lot of people that he impacted really deeply. Sorry, it's hard to talk about this eloquently, but it's I've been thinking about him a lot lately, and yeah.